Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am your host, Deb Philman, and I am very privileged today to have Charles Love in the studio with me to talk about his new book. For the three of you who don't know who he is, and I'm guessing it's like three of you, Charles is the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence, or SEE, a nonprofit whose mission is to empower disadvantaged students to reach their full potential. He is the host of the Charles Love Show on AM560 The Answer and co-host of Cut the Bull podcast. He's a scholar at 1776 Unites, contributing writer at City Journal, and the author of two other books besides one we're going to talk about: Logic, The Truth About Blacks and the Republican Party, and We Want Equality, How the Fight for Equality Gave Way to Preference. And today we're talking about the latest book, Race Crazy. I'm going to show you the cover because I want you to emblazon this on your mind so you can go to Amazon and order it. Okay. This book is phenomenal. I was very privileged to be given an advance copy. And this is the beautiful cover, right? BLM 1619 and the Progressive Racism Movement by Charles Love. Today, however, because of the constraints of time, we're going to stick to the talk about 1619, which dovetails very nicely with my channel's focus, which is education, although you should read all of this because it does all relate to culture and education. Remember, culture is kind of downstream from education, so this is all important. You need to read the whole book. We're going to talk about that 1619 part today. So, Charles, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. That was a mouthful, so it reminded me that bio's way too long. I need to cut it down to like 2 cents. Made me sound way more important than I am. And I want to set the bar low so I can trip over it. And the second quick thing is you can pick up the book, pre-order it, but you mentioned Amazon, and I mentioned to some of my friends, I want to support you, but I don't want to do that. So you can get it at Books A Million, you can get it at Barnes and Noble. I think Amazon is the cheapest though, but whatever. Don't not buy it because you're mad at Jeff Bezos.
Right. Don't not buy it. Find a way and buy the book. Okay, that's the first
I don't condone stealing, but steal the book if you have to steal the book.
Okay. So I was really lucky because I got to meet you in person last weekend in Boston at the conference. That was a real treat. Yeah, and I, watching that sort of live version of Cut the Bull was a trip. Loved that. For those of you, by the way, who are new to the channel, can you please go ahead and subscribe because you will get more content like this, and share this video right now. Share this link so we can get more people on to hear what Charles has to say. This is important content. Your kids are being taught this stuff in their school. They need to hear why that's a problem. So please share it out. The replay will be available right after the show, but it's helpful if they're here because they can maybe ask questions. You never know. All right. So getting down to business. I love your approach because, I'm going to let you explain your approach. Everybody listen to this. He has a unique approach for addressing content or addressing arguments that other people make that he disagrees with. Explain how you do it.
Well, I think it's wonderful, and not just because it's my approach, but the way I came up with it is mostly because, like you and other people in this space who come up with different ways to talk about the problems, and they saw a problem. They were normal people like you and me, day job. I'm not a politician and all this other stuff. And I saw a problem, and I said, somebody needs to do something beyond just those people. People need to speak up. But it takes a lot of time and effort to do a podcast or to write an article, do this stuff. So if I'm going to spend my time doing it, I can't just come out and say the same thing everybody else is saying. So what would be my lane? And what I thought was, I saw a lot of conservatives and a lot of people, liberals who understood the problems with this stuff, pushing back against it. But they had different approaches based on their personality. But one thing that was similar is they all would say, this is wrong and this is why, or I don't agree with you and this is why. And I thought that was good, and I do it as well. But I said, what else can I add? And what I thought was missing was, what if we're wrong? It's possible that we're wrong. Mm-hmm. Or what if they get what they want? So I try to make an argument of saying, I can say that I think it's wrong to tell an 8-year-old he can change his gender and hide it from his parents. I think that's wrong. I think many people would. And I'll explain, this is what you're doing is wrong. But then I do what I call, on my cup, I give them their argument. So it's my other thing, and it's a common refrain. And I say, let's assume you're right. So walk me through, just logically, because I use a logical approach, and I think that they are intellectually lazy, emotionally weak and intellectually lazy, surface thinkers, and they're not using logic. So if that is the case, then I would say, okay, let's walk down your road. Let's go take your plan and follow it. Where will it lead us? So what happens is that if you're talking to someone who thinks that way, what you find, if they're honest and they're willing to talk to you and not just call you names, is they run out of answers because no one's ever challenged what they said without yelling. It becomes a yelling match. Oh, I can yell with the best of them, they'll say. But when I just say, maybe you're right, tell me how that works. And then they say something, you say, okay, then what happens? What do you think happens then? And then they run out of things because no one ever just calmly asks them the questions. So my approach is to say, assuming you're right, here's the problem with your approach, or assuming you're right, which I don't think so, but if we give you your argument and do what you want to do, will that result in the thing that you want? And 9 times out of 10, it won't.
Right. I love that. I love taking their argument and following it to its logical conclusion, especially because they're not using logic. Have you done this ever with somebody like in person and seen like the light bulb go on? Has that ever happened
Wow,
or?
yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it doesn't happen as often as you think, but it works better than most people would think because the problem is you can't use this. I think everybody should use this process, but you can't use it two ways. You can't assume that you're going to have this conversation and in 5 minutes everybody's going to agree with you, right? It takes a process. And two, you need to know the difference between liberals and the left, which a lot of people are starting to see, and most people didn't notice it. So they lump them all in together, especially if you're a hard right conservative. Like, no, it's not the same. You can disagree with them. They may even agree on same things, but they're totally different, both in the way they approach issues and the way they think. So I use it also as a way to find out if you're a liberal or a leftist. And once I find out you're a leftist, I don't argue. I don't get into those debates because I got a country to save and people to convert. So all I say is, okay. And I just say, you're right, and move on. You're right. All white people are racist and all black people are victims. I don't argue that. Okay. And I move on. And then they try to, continue coming. It's like, no, I said you're right. There's nothing to debate because I know it's a waste of time. However, with the other group of people, which is a much larger group of people, what I do is I plant the seed. And when I see them starting to think like, and they run out of things, a lot of times I kind of gauge which one to do. Most of the time, I just let it go there. Let it seep in. I see it working, especially if it's somebody I know I'm going to see again, because I have conversations with everybody. So if it's my Uber driver, I want to leave them with something that'll make them think about it or whatever, because we're not going to, solve the world's problem in a short ride. But if it's a coworker, I'm going to see them every day. So once I see them I just say, all right, we'll talk about this later. And then the next time a situation presents itself that I can use as an example, I say, remember the last time we were talking about this? Here's a great case. If you read my last book, I should have done it in this book, but I was angry when I wrote it. But in the last book, I had a thing that I used to call the logic board. And it came up from a real idea. I had a person in the office that we used to talk about all this stuff all the time. And I would go up to the wall and create a fictional logic board. And I said, okay, and it may not necessarily be their point. It's not a knock on them, but it'll be something in the news, from the police, something like that. I said, let's assume they're right. And with my imaginary chalk, I'll write what they're saying. So what they want to do with this is, here, explain to me what's going to happen. One of three things, either this, this, or this, right? So they would look at that and say, oh, you're right, that won't work. So some people have been, change the way they're thinking over time, and some instantly just say, for that issue, it's like, oh, you're right, I used to think this way, but now I don't. And some would just say, well, I still feel this way, but you still win. Here's the third way. They still agree with the left on a certain issue. But because I explained it so well, now tell me that this is not a big win too. This is the worst you get of the three. Now they think, I still think I'm right about X, but because of the way Charles explained it, I don't think the people who oppose me are Hitler, are racist.
That's a big win, though.
So that's a win, right? So
that's
now when they see Ted Cruz make an argument, they don't instantly say, well, he's just saying that because he's a racist. I'm like, they think about what Charles said and they say, well, some people, I don't agree with him, but some people just think that. It doesn't make them a bad person. And, that's huge, especially today when everybody's evil.
Right. And you also don't really know, are they saying that now as a way to kind of keep the bridge and save face at the same time? So you don't know, like maybe privately they're thinking, yeah, he has a really good point, but I'm going to give it to you as, okay, they're not evil.
Right.
And they might still be thinking about it, still working it out, because that's a step in the right direction. That means there's a door open in their mind that they'll listen to what that person's saying from now on, because if you believe the other side is evil
Yeah.
or something evil like racist,
Hmm.
you're closed. Why would you listen?
Yeah. Why would you? Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
So I think it's fantastic. And that is the approach you've taken throughout this book. And I really loved it because I think it's going to be helpful to me as I approach people about 1619. I now have something I can use. A lot of
Hmm.
books you read, like you pointed out, a lot of the books you read, and you're like, okay, I see the factual errors, but all I can do is repeat the factual errors.
Right.
That's not
Then it becomes an argument.
right, and it's not nearly as compelling, so I love that. So thank you for explaining that to us. Um, let's talk a little bit about those factual errors. There were a few things you pointed out that jumped out at me that were like, even though I kind of knew the history, I went, "Whoa." So the first one, can you explain to people about we're talking about 1619 Project. If you haven't read the essay, the specific one by Nicole Hannah Jones, that's what we're talking about right now. Tell the audience what the central premise was and her content, her main core argument,
Right.
and then like let's go through the factual things that were wrong with it, specifically Plymouth versus Virginia, omission of Grant, and election of blacks. But first, what's her premise?
Well, the premise of her and the other essayists, the project itself, is to frame the country and its founding around slavery.
Right.
And they use this as a launching point. Actually, it's not just going back to then. It's like some people say some things were racist and some things weren't. I'm gonna
Right.
prove that the country is racist at its core, and then walk away. That would be bad enough. But they take that and bring it full circle to say that is the reason why the country is the way it is today, and why blacks are experiencing the things they experience today, which is a pretty aggressive leap in itself. So when the project came out to fanfare and critique, I kind of give myself a little pat on the back here when you talk about these things, because I am not a historian, by training. Of course, I do love history, but as some historians took them to task. But I read it and I'm like, wow, they left out some obvious things, because if you go back and read some of the critiques from historians, they all said the same thing, and I'll get to one or two of them. But that was it. I'm like, look at all these things they left out. And it's not that I know history better. I think that I am better than the average person at logically thinking about things. Like when I hear a story, like if you and I, 10 people, let's say 10 people, read a story, a headline, see something, and 8 of them might have different reaction. I mean, different beliefs about that situation or that topic, but they might think the first thing when they read the article. I'm usually that guy when I read it, I thought about something totally different. So my approach is just naturally different. So the premise of it is that slavery is endemic to the country. It's in the DNA. Racism is in DNA. No doubt about it. That's the reason it was founded. So to frame this, that's why we hear the 1619 Project, because they're saying 1619 is the true founding of America, not 1776, because 1619 is the year the first slaves were brought into the shores of what is now America. And that led to all the other things that happened in America, led to mass slavery, led to the Civil War, led to Jim Crow and the Black Codes, and it was in every corner and every fashion of the country. It's in the Constitution. It's everywhere. Even when it's not written, it's really there. All the way up to put a black man going to jail today. So that is the premise. So historians said that what they took her to task on was saying, because part of it says that the Revolutionary War, the war for our independence, the very war that made the country, was all about, it was really a war to, because the people who would eventually become Americans wanted to hold slaves, and the British wanted to stop them from having slaves. And it was a war to maintain slavery, which, if you know anything about history, is laughable. But I just make it simple. I don't even focus on that in the book. I think I mentioned it. I just say, let's just say, don't take my word for it, because you got to consider who your audience is, and everybody may not agree with you. They may be looking to poke holes in what you say. So I said, don't take my word for it. Just use a basic fact, as you said. What year was the war? What year was not the war? What year did the country declare its independence? You got a year. Everybody knows that year. And what year did the British end slavery? And then I just leave it at that. One 1776, I believe the others 1833. So they fought a war because the one side wanted to make them not own slaves, though it took that side 60 years to actually stop holding slaves. Okay. You think that's logical? Roll with it, right? So the historians attacked them for that. And what was the other one that the historians said? I think the historians might have said the Plymouth, not in detail as idea, but we'll talk about some of the other things.
People don't even grasp it. What I loved about it was, when she's talking about America. Now, most Americans think of America as the actual Declaration of Independence. We are now a separate country. But if you're thinking, as she's arguing, that our essence, our being as Americans, that the whole founding of the American country and idea and everything was 1619, and that's how it's in our DNA. Which colony, you're contrasting Plymouth and Virginia, right?
Right.
Jamestown.
Jamestown.
Which one was more in line with the ultimate country that we actually founded?
Right.
So explain that to people, how that's different.
So we all remember, I don't know if they do it now because they don't show it on TV anymore and kids don't really learn anything but racism anymore. But when we were in school, we used to learn about this stuff, but we used to go home on Saturdays and watch cartoons, and we would watch Schoolhouse Rock.
No more Schoolhouse,
right? And there was a Schoolhouse Rock video about the landing of Plymouth. It's got the rock, it says Plymouth, it's got this whole thing. So we all grew up knowing, hey, the people who would eventually become Americans landed on Plymouth Rock. Yeah. And then they say, no, Jamestown. So I frame this in a way that I think an honest liberal and Black people who have the issue with the race thing would understand it, and they may disagree with it down the road, but they can't say I'm just blatantly being blind and cherry picking. I ask a question, right? And I say, so we are claiming that the origin, even though the country was founded in 1776, those origins were pulled from Plymouth, right? 1620. She is claiming 1619. So they're to Black people, they're all white Europeans. It's 1 year difference. They all eventually own slaves. We still end up with slavery and Jim Crow. So what's the big deal about the 1 year? Why couldn't she just say, yeah, we were founded from the colony of Plymouth in 1620, and eventually all this really bad happened. Write the same essays. The problem is she wanted to tie the country to 1619, particularly because of these slaves. And Plymouth didn't have slaves when they came here. And although there would eventually be slaves there, it was like some 50 to 70 years later. And, it doesn't really, it makes it hard to say it's in their DNA from the beginning. So we switch. But you're like, it's 1 year. What's the big deal? So that was the one thing I said. So let's look at the differences between the two colonies in the book. I said, both white, both Europeans. One came as a true British colony, which if you all remember, if you don't, you look it up, it's when monarchs would say, hey, I'm wealthy and I run everything and I want more land. And I took over this land here. So Deb, you're a friend of mine. We go way back. I love your family. So I'm going to give you this little plot called whatever that is, over there. And you can go, if you take your boat over there and take a couple people, I'll let you plant a seed, plant your flag, you run it, you make money, but you got to kick back some money to me. And you got to make it one of my territories, but you get to run it. It could be Deb land. You can call it whatever you want. That's cool. That's how, a lot of the colonies, including Jamestown, was founded. And then you have Plymouth. Well, these were Europeans, but they had fled Britain because of religious persecution, went to Holland, I believe, and then eventually made their way here, hoping to have religious freedoms. They weren't tied to any country. They weren't working under a monarch. Mm-hmm. And the other difference is they had the pillars that would eventually be what our Declaration and our Constitution were founded on. Freedom of religion, being able to own personal private property, all these four pillars. They were mostly religious, where the others weren't based on a mostly Protestant religious foundation. So these are key differences between the two colonies. Even though it's 1 year, the people were different, right? So. Yep.
That private property thing is key because in Jamestown, almost everybody there was some form of indentured servant.
Right.
So you're not just talking about slaves. You're also talking about different kinds of ownership of humans.
Yeah.
So totally different ethic there.
So those are the differences. But the one other thing that I was surprised the historians didn't mention, and you alluded to it, even if now I'm going back to giving them their argument. The country was founded at the time in the 1600s by a bunch of racist slave owners. Check. We all agree it's 100% factual. But explain to me, because the project goes on to say, this is uniquely American. This is American capitalism. This is American slavery.
Right.
But two key points that you can't get around, and that is all people, left, right, center, every historian estimates that 12 million and change people were stolen from Africa. 400,000 of them landed in America. They never talk about the other 12 million, 11.9 million. So we got 3% in what would eventually be America. And the majority went to Central America. Went to the Caribbean and other places, Brazil, Latin America. So that alone, you would think, would make it not uniquely American. But I'll go a step further. And I go on to talk about, put yourself in the mindset of 1619. See, that's the problem what people do here, is they try to pull Thomas Jefferson and drop him in 2020, and anything he says now is in the context of 2021, and you can't do that. So let's do the opposite. Let's go back there, close our eyes, step into anywhere you want to, anywhere USA today, on that land that is South Carolina, that is Georgia, that is Louisiana, that is New York City. And open your eyes and say, who's running this colony? Who's running this city, this state, this town, this area? Right. It will be the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch. Yeah, or the Great Britain, right? So we forget that we bought Louisiana. Remember the Louisiana Purchase? We bought that area of land, which is more than just Louisiana. And that area was conquered and fought between Spanish and then the French, and then back to Spain and all this other stuff, right? We bought it from the French, but it was Spanish and French, and they were fighting over it. The Dutch founded New York, right? Used to be New Amsterdam. I talk about all that in the book. So my point is simply, in 1627, wherever that slave was in America wasn't in America. He was in an area that was controlled by the French, the Spanish, or the British. Right. It's not America. Yet we give them a pass. No one says anything about them. They're cool. They're still, correct me if I'm wrong, is Spain still around?
I think so. I have a globe over there.
And the argument would be, well, some of those places, like when they talk, when others, and I don't even bring it up because I just know it's an argument everybody gets mad about. Because people say, you in my article, you didn't talk about this. I'm like, it's just not worth the effort. But when they talk about the blacks who sold their other Africans in Africa, a lot of argument for the people who will admit that will say, yeah, but we can't really go after them because these are poor countries now. Okay, got to give them the argument. What's your issue with Spain and France and Great Britain? They're not poor now. You're not going after them. So you don't even mean what you're saying. If you really wanted reparations, you were really mad, you would be going after the countries that own slave ships first. You would be going after, all these people, companies that are still in business that participated in slavery. And to be factual, everybody benefited from it. So I ain't owned a slave, but I ran a bank and I made money off the interest of the plantations that I funded, or I bought their raw materials. It would be like today if you say child workers in these plants in China is so unfair and inhumane. So, but I'm not going to refuse to buy an Apple phone or wear Nike. So you're complicit, because if you didn't buy the product, they wouldn't make money. Or you demanded, if I buy your product, you must stop using this child labor. They would stop, right? So you don't really care, except for when it fits your narrative. So that's one of the things I point out there.
Okay.
There's others, right? You want me to go on others?
Well, yeah, that was a key one. That was a key one because they don't do that. It's a complete omission, which is a lot of what she does. She kind of omits things. And here's the other thing that people forget. This came out in 2019, and one of the big things, it was like the 400th anniversary of that. So, we can surmise or infer that perhaps she wanted to stick like glue to 1619 and not discuss all that other 1620 stuff.
399 years wouldn't work.
It's much better for marketing. It's much better narrative. So then you go on, so that's kind of one big problem. And then you went on to talk about how she's in a historical fact thing. She completely leaves out Reconstruction and Ulysses S. Grant. Her whole argument is like all white people are racist and all white people always have been, and that the only freedoms that Black people have gotten was due to their struggle.
Right.
In fact, the only freedoms that anybody who wasn't white got was due to Black struggle.
Don't talk about immigrants. Don't even get her started.
No. But let's talk about Ulysses S. Grant. What did Ulysses do?
Let's see, Ulysses. I heard of him. I had to go do some Google because it wasn't in the project. And let me tell the people who you got to read some stuff. So those of you all who want to understand the whole overall arching theme of this here is, to be honest, I want to make sure I say this in every interview, because at some point, Nicole Hannah-Jones is going to hear about this book and going to attack me. So I want to be clear. I made it a point to say that much of what she puts in the essay and the other essays are factual.
That's true.
Much of it is true. All the bad she's talking about, I would say 90% of it is true. I'm not arguing that it's not true. But when you finish, I think you say you're about 70% finished, or anyone who reads the essays, I challenge you to read those essays and find one positive thing about America in it. I can only think of one, and it tripped out by accident. I'm sure if the editors caught it, they would take it out. But there's nothing positive. So my thing is, say the negative. You say you want true history and it's too flowery, so let's put some negative stuff in there. Fine. But you can't put the negative stuff in and just eliminate all the positive and think that's cool. So there's nothing positive, one problem. And the like you mentioned, the whole thing about spinning the narrative and omission. So
yeah. Oh, this is the wrong one. I'm sorry. I was trying to put it up here because the way you explained it, I'm going to find.
If you still have it, you can take time to find it while I think about it. So the other thing about omission. So she talks about, it'd be different if she ignored Reconstruction, which would be weird, but that'd be fine. But she talked about Reconstruction in a heavy dose. There's a lot of Reconstruction in the project. Right. But somehow Grant didn't make it at all. No mention of him at all. But it's funny, somehow Rutherford B. Hayes made it in there. Because if you do your history, you look up in 1876, it was a contentious election, kind of like 2000 and 2020. And so he needed to make some bargains, and he worked with the Democrats to let the former Confederates back in. And that made it in there. But Ulysses S. Grant, who, forget about president, who also was the general who won the Civil War, became president, decimated the Klan. I like to remind people right now, you say the Klan still exists, but it's not in power, or all the Klan we all remember in the 20s, the crazy Woodrow Wilson and the birth of a nation, that was a different Klan. That was Klan number 2.
Totally different.
Grant decimated the first Klan. The Civil Rights Acts, that was him. 2-term president. His whole presidency fell within Reconstruction, and he is not mentioned in the project. Because you have to say something positive about him.
Not at all.
Yeah.
2 terms.
All that stuff.
And then
the 15th Amendment.
Right. Battle for equal rights, et cetera, et cetera. And she just doesn't even mention any of these people. And I love this line. That's a lot of racist DNA supporting the rights of Blacks. It's like, okay, so all these people who did all these things for Blacks, like, why?
No, according to her, these Blacks, and I got to also say this, to be fair, well written, really smart people wrote this project, well written. If it was a movie script or you would use it, beautifully written, well written. It's like Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now it's better written than Ta-Nehisi Coates himself. But look, but that's not the issue. So they say things like, with this new freedom after the 13th Amendment and the right to vote, talk about the 15th Amendment and all that. So these Blacks newly minted right to vote, they went out and they fought against all these racists who didn't want them to vote, and they made this change, which is great, except the senators they're talking about and the people that got elected, the first ones got elected in 1870, and Blacks didn't get the right to vote until officially in the Constitution a month or two after these people had already been in office. And senators were elected by state legislatures, not the population, which is, I'm surprised the historians didn't point that out. So when she talks about rebels becoming the first U.S. senator because Blacks fought their way to the polls, he didn't get a Black vote because the state legislators voted for him, and they were already seated, and they were all white.
This cannot be overstated. You've got a situation where people were property, like, 5 minutes ago. I mean, they were property, like a cow. Okay. And the Black people who were property with them could not vote for them. Like I really want to drive this point home. They got into high office because white people said you and picked them.
And Paul, when he went to take his seat, A lot of the whites who were racist were like, I know we're not going to allow him to sit. We're not coming in. And those radical Republicans fought for that.
Yeah.
They fought to make that happen.
Yep. But according to her, there's nothing positive any white person ever did for Black people ever.
She mentions the civil rights movement, right? Great movement. Did she mention any whites? She mentioned lynching, what they did. They peeled back skin and did all this stuff. Really graphic, well written.
Mhm.
But she didn't mention the 1,500 to 2,000 whites who were lynched.
1/3, a full third of them.
All people lynched were white, you know. But she did, and most of them though were doing it because they were fighting racism. And you could say it's noble, but there's two problems with that. One, that would be a positive of whites. But if it's noble, how do you not mention them? But beyond that, you could say that the rest of them were weak. There were probably plenty of white people who thought it was wrong. It was like, but I'm not going to put my life on the line and die for this. So these whites left college, left their comfy confines up north. Some of them used their money in the South to fund a lot of things that they believed, which were to push equal rights for Blacks. Not one of them is. Do you know people? Of course, Deb knows, but do you know that they never mentioned abolitionists in the movie? So they talk. I also rail against the way the founders are described, because there's nothing positive to say about the founders. Yeah. In fact, her essay, I think, is entitled something like "America was the ideals of America were false when they were founded, or were a lie," or something. So. Saying all men are created equal is a lie because you don't like the guy who said it, right? So if I give you a great hamburger recipe, but I hate Jews, then my hamburger recipe doesn't work. I mean, one has nothing to do with the other. You know, facts and emotions are two totally separate issues, and that's the way they approach it. But beyond that, nothing positive about the founders. They were all racist, da-da-da-da-da. But do you think, who wants to guess? I think they kind of know where this is going, but like, who out there wants to guess whether or not Nicole Hannah-Jones or any essayist in the 1619 Project admitted that nearly a third of the founders, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, were abolitionists and never owned slaves? Go. The answer was, who said zero? You're correct. Never mentioned that.
Yes.
None of them. Because why would you mention anything positive?
Yeah, well, right? When your thesis is so
DNA
one-sided, it's DNA. That really... What bothers me about that, and that it's going to be taught to kids in school, is that she's making a connection between your biology. She is talking about racial essentialism. And then you just mentioned, acting like, all whites were for things. You talk about Jim Crow too. And something else that I've had to say over and over again to people, and they kind of don't really believe me because they were never taught in school. So much for the true history that people want to teach, right? They're still not teaching this fact that Jim Crow was
What did I say?
Did every white person
want to
buy
Jim
into
Crow
that?
Was not the prevailing views of most whites. Most whites didn't give a crap about it. Most whites are like most whites now. I'm living my life. I'm not left or right. I'm not even political. It would be the 1870s version of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. They're just living their lives and not paying attention. Some fought against it because they're like, it's so wrong, I'm willing to put my life on the line. Noble, but most people aren't doing that. Most of us are cowards. It's true. Doesn't make us bad people. It's like, I care as long as I can stay safe. I'm sitting in my living room saying, that's really bad what they're doing with the blacks. I'm not going to go out there and say it. Doesn't make them evil. Stop making it seem that they're evil. But so some fought against it. Some were racist and wanted it. But most of them didn't want it. They talk about the segregated streetcars. We all know about the bus boycotts, right? But the streetcar owners were like, this is terrible for business. We don't want to segregate people. That's hurting my bottom line, right? And there's a research paper that talks about how they did this research and found that a lot of the owners was like, we were all for, in the capitalist section, we're all for letting capitalism fix it by saying, well, why don't we just charge these racist whites who are so hell-bent on being separate for blacks, just charge them more.
Yeah, exactly.
Make it a premium, make it the VIP. and let the racists go to VIP, the black whites who don't care, and the rest of the blacks who sit where they want to sit, those people sit in VIP and everybody would be cool. You don't need a law.
Right. Well, at least you'd be able to identify who the racists are real easily.
Right. Nobody would care about that, and it could have happened, but it is what it is, and it goes back to the systemic racism thing too. So the reason the country was more racist at a given time than it is now wasn't the system. The system's not perfect, but the system is the best of any other country that's ever been developed. The issue is the people. You have to have people who pull the levers of the system. So the system is like a bicycle, right? It's a bicycle sitting there minding its own business on a kickstand. Is it a racist bicycle? Is it DNA? It's the DNA of the bicycle. Completely racist. Of course not. It's a bicycle. So I get on it. I ride the bike as it's going along this other way. An evil person gets on the bike and decides they're going to put, spikes on the front and start running into people and stabbing people. It doesn't make the bike bad. It's the person who's on the bike. So the laws didn't say, blacks had to do X, Y, Z. The system didn't say that. Somebody got elected and decided that they were going to push these laws and sign these laws and implement these laws. And then nobody stopped them, or racists elected them. But that still doesn't mean that means the majority, a higher percentage of people in certain areas were racist. And as those attitudes changed, guess what happened? The laws changed because the system was fine. The system wasn't racist. The people in the system was racist. They were racist.
Are we seeing that today? Maybe a little bit. Anyway, going back to the whole, she leaves out context of Europeans and all that.
Right.
It should be noted that she makes a big point of bragging every chance she gets that she studied history, but she did not study any European history.
Right.
Like, that's a good thing.
Because that's not really history. Or probably not world history. But keep in mind, the other problem, let's take it back to the schools. So I'm sure at some point it's going to come up. I don't want to stop your flow. We can come back to this, but we'll get to probably into the CRT thing and people arguing that, and why you hear me and talking about, that's just my fight. I'm not telling people not to fight. It's not my fight, because they're losing sight of what's happening. You talked about this project coming out in 2019. It came out in the fall. I think it came out in August.
Yeah.
August. It came out in August. Listen to this, people. This is how you know it's connected, and it's a movement, it's a shipment, and they got people in place, and it's a whole machine. Came out in August.
What was going on?
19, so it had nothing to do with George Floyd.
Right.
And in September, it was in 4,500 schools.
Yeah.
The Pulitzer, it won a Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Foundation is pushing it. So it's probably in 20,000 schools now. So why all these people up here are like, it's CRT. Is it CRT? Is it not CRT? Tell me what the definition is. This madness is being pushed. And oh, by the way, their founder, the great Nicole Hannah-Jones, in her own words, when being challenged and backed in the court, had to admit, well, I never said this was history. I said this is a work of memory. And I didn't give her a hard time for that. I just said, I just want to know why we're teaching somebody's work of memory in school.
Exactly.
As history and social studies. It's her memory. She never says whose memory. Is it her memory? Is she that old? Whose memory is that? But somebody's memory, and we need to teach it.
And she keeps saying, I just wanted to examine what would we think of America if we thought this. It's like, well, gosh, what would I think of you if I thought you were, born of Satan? I mean, I would think a whole lot less of you, wouldn't I? I mean,
right.
You can take anything that is and put it in a completely different context arbitrarily, or omit all the context arbitrarily. And of course that's like stating the obvious. You're going to see it however you framed it. It's just logic. Framing is your choice of how you want to see things. And that brings me to my next point, which is you do something the others don't do. You take a look at the framer, at the person doing the work. You looked at her.
Right.
And you had an observation that I think everybody else missed about her. What was that?
Yeah. This is funny. I was thinking about it the other day because I was watching my co-host Shamika Michelle on Jason Whitlock's show Fearless, and he brought up something about certain people always speaking for the Black community, and they got this weird angle, and I laughed. I was like, oh, he should read my book. So I'm reading the essay. So if I'm gonna pick the essays apart, I got to read them. So there's about 14 essays in the project. In my book, there's a chapter on each one, and I take the same approach to each. This is what they're right about. This is what they're wrong about. Quickly, you talk about lots of lies of omission, which I talk about. The other thing they do is poor inferences. They come to weird conclusions. So the fact is there, and they'll say, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. We all say, yes, that's true. Therefore, Jeff Bezos is a vegetarian. You're like, what? How'd you get that from that? Whoa, how we get to Jeff Bezos? This is like crazy. So even though the initial fact is true, what she gleans from it is so weird in our space, you say, wonder what's
there was an example, a really good example of that is she talks about how culture was stolen from slaves. They were taken from their country and their culture was stolen, and they had to be in the culture they were in, or the slave culture.
Mhm.
And then in the next breath talks about the unique Black culture and things they're unique to Black culture, about like hair braiding and clothing and bright colors
Right.
and different things that come from slavery.
And
And
then
it's
the
like,
way she describes them is so, it makes me go,
it's so
when I got to that point, I was
stereotypical. It's
just like,
kind of gross. But it's like, wait, let me get this straight. So the culture was stolen and they didn't have their own, but the culture they now have that's unique comes from slavery.
yeah, but that just with the way that they were framed, that though is to say that just proves the creativity and resilience of Blacks, because they were able to just create their own culture based on the situation they were in, and that's what they'll say to that. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is the things she described as Black culture were stupid. It was like, yeah, because of slavery, now, Biggie Smalls raps in a different way. And because of his rap, that whole way he raps was born on the plantation. So I'm supposed to assume that Chris Wallace, when he decided he was going to change his name and become a rapper, he didn't start listening to other rappers and learning how to flow and thinking how to be witty about a story. No, no, no. He went back in history and read the chronological, factual anthology of slavery so he could assume that in his rap. It's stupid. It's just
Right.
dumb. There's just no other way around it. It's dumb. It's just stuff to add, and people cheered it. But to your point, so I'm reading every essay. And I'm reading the founder's essay, and I'm reading through it, and I laughed because I know if Black people read that and I told them that, they would laugh and be like, yep, right. And white people would be like, what the hell are you talking about? So I'm reading to people, and she's telling a story, and talking about her father. My father hung a flag up, and he was patriotic even though he was treated poorly, and I never understood that. It seemed weird to me. And she was like, so he grew up in the South, I forgot where, and her grandmama, his mother, moved the family to the North, hoping to escape Jim Crow and have a better life, only to find more segregation. And then they did this, and grandma did this, and my grandma used to say this, and my father did this, and she's going through, right, telling the whole story. The story's cool. And I went, instantly. Most people in general cling closer to their mothers. This whole thing is about her father. She hasn't mentioned her mother once. In a story about racism, her mama's white. And then I Googled it, and her mother's white. I was like, that's the only reason she would never talk about her mother. How did she write a whole essay about her childhood? She talked about school. She talked about things and teachers did that, how she was bused to school. The first a third of her essay is about her childhood. She never mentioned her mother. How could you all not catch that? I'm like, her mama's white.
And who else do we know that did that? I wonder.
We can go down a laundry list.
But that's what I'm saying. You made the point initially. You said that as you were thinking it through, it's like you were writing your thought process. Mm-hmm. And you said, Black people we have this like silent thing. Black people will understand this and will know where I'm going with this. And white people will be surprised.
Right.
And you were right. 100% right. I'm reading this going, like,
even Black liberals will admit, biracial Blacks, not all of them, some of them live their own life, they have identity things, they figure out they're cool with it. But the ones who are think about the most vocal Blacks you can think about right now that are pushing out against the race thing, right? The most vocal, pro-Blacks, whatever. Either they're one of three things. Either they are biracial, or they're in an interracial relationship, or they're probably just doing it for money, right? So it's got, because if they're on TV and all that stuff. But I mean, can you name one or two or 50? I mean, literally, I could just start naming out names, all of them. People. I don't want to name any names. I don't want to, but there's a lot. And one of them used to be president. And one of them is an anchor on CNN. One of them's an R&B pop star. One of them was
mayor of Chicago.
One of them was a football player who took a knee. One of them.
Mayor of Chicago too.
Right. And there's lots. Let's just say there's lots.
Lots and lots.
One of them won an Academy Award as a director for a horror film. One of them, I'm not saying any names. One of them was on The Voice. Do I need to stop? There's lots of them. Lots of them. If you're a Black and you are like, this country's racist and you're rich, you are probably married to a white person, or you were born and you have an identity crisis where you're trying. I say in the book, I'm not trying to analyze people, but it happens so much that one should question.
And you have a theory. it seemed to me you had kind of a theory about why that might be, and
They
what.
feel they need to prove their blackness, especially, or there's another one. Both parents are black, but they grew up affluent in the suburbs, but they want to associate themselves with the struggle. Like, we all don't have the struggle anyway. You're going to grow up in the hood and not necessarily be in a gang and all that stuff. You're around stuff, but they don't know that because they didn't grow up there. So they feel they have to, the only way they can identify to the rest of the blacks is to either assume, move into the community to do X, Y, Z, or just assume the things that they say as their own identity and become this very militant. But I mean, Colin Kaepernick, he's biracial, but he didn't really know both parents. He grew up with a white family, but he grew up middle class, went to a nice school, went to college, successful, whatever. I'm mad, right? It's just something about it makes it seem like, anyway, again, not analyzing, that they have something to prove in their blackness, that they say, I must speak up. Because, okay, let's say I'm wrong. I could be, I'm open to that. But I do find it odd that then why aren't the loudest voices just regular average black folks? And if you say it's because they don't have the platform, there are plenty of successful and wealthy blacks, and most of them, even the ones who speak out against injustices, but they still do it differently. Here's an example. Ice Cube speaks out against that. He talked about the country. He was part of a group whose album, he had an album called America KKK's Most Wanted, but he still doesn't sound like, all these biracials, I'm only going to hire blacks for my movie. He doesn't sound like them, right? You can go down the list. You can say activists who are not, activists who are, which ones are more in your face, like, oh, I hate white people.
And also there's that racial essentialism piece that, all and none. Right. So where you have to talk only about the negatives and all white people are racist, this whole anti-racist message, the Kendiism, I'd love to do an analysis of Kendi's background, but I don't think he's biracial, but he definitely has some kind of thing. But
or he could just be doing it because it made
making
him a
lot of money.
but quickly to that though is the anti-racist thing. It's just like I was describing earlier when I said my problem with that piece, that one approach, is you're arguing against human nature. It's human that we call people heroes for a reason, right? Because it's not a knock. The average person would run away from gunfire. The guy who runs to tackle the shooter is the anomaly, right? That's why you call him a hero. Exactly. What he is saying, that if you see racism, right, and you think it's wrong, and you go home and your wife is like, I can't believe that guy did that. This is unconscionable, just unconscionable. Nobody should be treated like that. That's not good enough. You need to go out and punch the racist in the face, or you are also a racist. Well, that's not human nature. The average person is going to mind their own business. And white people, if you don't take anything else from this wonderful information I'm giving to you, take away that it's okay. It's not your job to fight everybody's fight. Some people will. There's enough out there that will, but it's not your job to attack every white guy who says a racist joke. It's not your job. Right. It's not your job to say, I'm not going to hire a white person. It's not your job.
Adam Coleman has a piece out today where he says, you don't have a right to my advocacy.
Right.
And it's a great piece. I highly recommend it. But
yeah, definitely. He's coming on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, awesome. So I think just that little bit about her psychology is important, but also from an educational standpoint, you mentioned the difference. You compare and contrast your upbringing and education with hers, and you sort of infer some things from that as well.
Oh, no, I said her family and her teacher failed her. I said it openly.
Explain to the audience how her teachers failed her and yours did not.
Right. She says she went to a school, I think she was bused, but she went to a school where they still had white teachers. And the white teachers were saying things like, they had this one assignment at the end of the essay where they told them to pick their ancestral homeland. She couldn't pick a country. She felt left out. They basically, like, she didn't say they said it, but she basically painted a picture like another teacher just made it seem like blacks have contributed nothing. So now she's overcorrecting, saying everything, the very few things good in America, and the only things that are the things that are black, right? She overcorrected. And I said they failed her. The fact that she talked about her father being patriotic, which is nice, but the fact that he didn't talk to her and he allowed her to think because he worked service jobs most of his career that he was less than, she was mad at him for loving the country and she couldn't understand it. That means he failed them. So since she approached that essay that way, where she spun a little history with her background and all that stuff, I figured I'd do the same. I got a story. We're supposed to be listening to black voices. I'm a black voice. I'm not mixed race. My black voice has more drops than hers. Um, so I'm like, well, let's just go to. And she talked
If
about
we're
her
getting
father.
down to DNA and all, I mean,
Right. So that's what we're talking about. And I said, she talked about her father. Well, let me talk about my father. And I point out, and so I go in pretty rough. This is probably, it's the longest chapter in the book, and it was my pouring it all out. And and I'm usually a pretty even keel guy. I was not nice. I held no punches. And I said, okay, let's compare and contrast. You're black, I'm black, you're blackish. I didn't say that in the book. I'm being funny. And I said that I grew up, my father, you grew up with your father. My father's 9 years older than your father. So, of course, he experienced all the. I talked about where my father grew up. My father grew up in Oklahoma, and where his ancestors came from and his parents and how they moved up north. But then I talked about, but where it changed. My father grew up, graduated from an integrated high school in East Chicago, Indiana. He graduated in 1939, right? I think her father was born in 45 or something.
45, yeah.
Yeah, my father graduated high school in 1939, went to the war, the great one, and came back, and he worked. He did all the different kind of jobs. And when I was growing up, he was always like, there's good people and bad people regardless of race. You get, like I talk about, he was kind of like an early version of trust but verify. It's like, don't assume because somebody black that they're cool, and don't assume because somebody white that they're racist. They may be, though. Be open to it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right, but don't just assume it. And I saw him around white people as equal. She made it seem like every white person in father's life had their thumb on him, right? Like pushing them down. So that's what was her vision of whites. I didn't have that vision of whites. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, not a rich town, majority black. I want to say it's somewhere around 90% black. Right. But people look at it as negative. I loved it. So like when I grew up in the 80s, all the criminals were black, all the drug dealers were black, and everybody, it was a murder capital of the world, a couple years after I graduated high school. But what we and a lot of my friends didn't notice at the time that I did later is that is true. But then all the positives we saw were black. So we saw black doctors and black business owners, and black police chief was black, and the mayor was black, and most of the teachers, except for the older ones who were closer to retirement, were black. So to the school, my teachers, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, when I was in middle school and junior high school, middle school and late elementary school, 6th grade, 5th grade, my teachers, when they were young, starting out, were the teachers who were the children of the civil rights movement, right? So they were probably born in the 40s, right? So they were like teenagers in college during the civil rights movement. So they were weird. I don't know if we still have them around. I love these people, because they were a wonderful mix of what people today would be like pro-black. They was truly, pro-black, black excellence, but not in a we used to be slaves kind of way, but like, pro-black. But they also loved the country. So that's what they instilled. They didn't really put their personal politics in it, didn't hit that crap. They didn't talk about whitey being racist. They taught math and science. And when they taught history, they taught, we had flashcards. They were like, who's the first black who was who was this an explorer? Who was this doctor? Who was the person who did this? Who's the person on the Supreme Court? All this kind of stuff. We talked about, all these different inventions, all this kind of stuff. We talked about people who did great things outside of being slave. Early 19th century, we talked about the Renaissance. We talked about blacks going to Ivy League schools, about blacks graduating college in the 1800s, which nobody ever talks about. So I just think we benefited from a richer education and people who pointed out positives of America and positives of blacks, talking about slavery and things that happened bad, but without condemning all whites. And she should have been taught that way, and maybe she wouldn't be such a bitter, angry person. And then, I talk about the fact that it's ironic that she came to fame. The only reason she is a household name in America right now is because she spews hate against white, and white leftists are morally inept, and they love that kind of stuff because they hate the country, and anybody who puts down the country is the positive. So they put her on a pedestal. So her whole pedestal is based on whiteness, but all she talks about is blackness, and black people think she's great. Right? She's a cop-out. She's only where she is because of the whiteness she hates. So if she truly believed it, she would say, no, Pulitzer, I won't take your prize, your lily white prize. Keep your lily white prize to yourself. I want the equivalent of a black Pulitzer, whatever that is. And no, New York Times, do not, I want to do my project, but I don't want your whiteness. pushing my project to the front. I want a black magazine to push my project to the front. But she didn't say that, did she? Yes, she's at an HBCU now because she was mad at North Carolina. But what's the first school she went to for tenure? UNC. No. She should have went to Howard first.
Right.
She's a phony.
Well, I would take it a step farther in my personal opinion. I think she's a racist. And
I don't definitely a racist.
And I think she's a racist against both black and white people, because all she ever talks about are as you point out in the book, the negatives of both. So she doesn't even talk about all the achievements of blacks, except she gives credit to blacks for like earning freedom for anyone, but then seems to make a really racist anti-immigrant argument.
Mm-hmm. How dare they?
Breath.
These darn Chinese students suing. They shouldn't even be here if it wasn't for black people.
Exactly. She is, as of even right this moment, tweeting away, although I'm blocked. I have to see it from other people, screenshots and whatnot. But she is tweeting against any kind of gifted program, saying it's perfectly appropriate. But in the next breath, to ban them right away, in the next breath, she's telling people who don't like being stuck in their failing schools or who are complaining about what's going on in schools, homeschool or go to private school.
Right.
As
but you can't do that because the racist white don't really want school choice. I saw that.
Yeah, and it's like, honey, the people who are begging for school choice the most are black people. Okay, you on one hand you say that the schools are failing and so forth. We got to get rid of gifted programs because it's somehow the existence of gifted programs and the Chinese people in them that are holding back black students. And in the next breath, you want to trap the black students in the failing schools because why? I don't even know. She talks out of both sides of her mouth, and the net result to me is that this is a racist woman upside down and backwards. Every which way she's racist.
And she doesn't talk about, I say there are no positives about America, giving them the argument, that's my approach.
Right.
Soon as she's right, all whites are racist, the country's endemically bad, and we got a long way to go. So the project is 14 essays or so, like I said.
Right.
Not only do they say nothing positive about America, they don't offer any solutions.
No.
So my first thing is, I'm like, okay, so what do we do?
Yeah.
Capitalism is racism. What do we do? Exactly. Traffic is racist. No, that's actually an essay.
I know.
No, traffic is racist. What do we do? So what's another one? Democracy is racist. What do we do?
Well, she says it's straight up a lie. So even though, as you've just pointed out, blacks.
So why fight then? If the idea is racist, the whole country is racist. The DNA of whites is, if the DNA, you can't fix the DNA, so they're all racist. Right. Why try to fix it then?
Well, yeah, and the big contradiction is, as you pointed out, on the one hand, she says everything that we were founded on was a lie from the get-go. The founders are liars. The founders are phonies. But then at the end wants to take credit for, the making civil rights, making those words true was black people who did that. And it's like, what?
But the words aren't true.
Right. And then the other thing is, she left out the suffragettes. You talk about she leaves out the suffragettes. She blames them for all the negatives they did. Yep. And as you pointed out, the suffragettes might have been more mad that black men who were property, as we previously discussed, had the voting rights and were serving in office
50 years before women got the right to vote. Not 3 weeks,
race.
Not 5 years, 5 decades.
0. Right. And so maybe they were talking to people and dealing with people who might get them the vote quicker, and not because we have to.
Oh yeah, you got to tell them the argument. The argument is that they worked with white supremacists and they were racist. So I don't know who they worked with down the line. I'm assuming that's true because most of the negative she wrote is true. But she also, back to a mission, look it up. Susan B. Anthony founded a voter rights, civil rights organization with Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
I think he was, I got to look it up, but I think he was black.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's black. He also was someone who was a slave and became a statesman after escaping and teaching himself, and was revered by white people at the time as a statesman, consulted by politicians and leaders all over the place. But you have a whole chapter, and I confess to you, I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. Why can't we teach this? So this woman is saying we need to teach the true history. That in the next breath, this isn't history, it's journalism, but we need to teach the true history, and can't make up her mind if hers is that. But why can't we teach the true history, which is what you just talked about?
It's funny you say that. And this is not for all the people. This is not a setup. But as you see, if you go on Twitter or Instagram, I am posting quotes that people read out of the book every day to promote the book. And I said, well, I think I should read one, right? So I picked one, and I want to read you the one I picked. You ready?
Yeah.
The author of that essay is her last name Stewart, because I don't have her first name here. And I say, Stewart asks, why can't we teach this? Here's the answer to her question. The 1619 Project cannot be taught because it is a toxic, anti-American, politically biased, defeatist collection of propaganda. While it is wrapped in enough truth to prevent it from being classified as fiction, its core is opinion and should not be allowed anywhere near a social studies or history classroom. Its greatest tool is lies of omission. The revisionist history starts with the project's name. The year 1619 is when the first slaves arrived in America. Therefore, they insist that is when the country started. A point they now claim was always intended to be a work of memory, not history. That memory is flawed. Even if you give them their argument and accept that the Plymouth Rock story was an example of whitewashing our beginning, and that the true beginning of America was in 1619 Jamestown, this does not start the slavery story in America, as Olivia Waxman, staff writer for Time History, notes. Nor is it the case that those who arrived in 1619 were the first enslaved people in what would become the United States. In 1565, for example, the Spanish brought enslaved Africans to present-day St. Augustine, Florida, the first European settlement in what's now the continental U.S. And this is just the European enslavement. If the behaviors of man across time are consistent in the Americas, as it was everywhere else, it would be logical to assume some Native American tribes enslaved members of other tribes. None of this is consistent with their slavery is uniquely an American institution rhetoric, so it is ignored. End quote.
Bam!
That's why.
It's not consistent with the narrative.
1565. Shouldn't the project be called the 1565 Project? Oh, but that was Spanish people, so we can't count that. But then again, in 1619, those were Brits. I don't know what these people are talking
call
about.
it steaming pile of... No, I'm kidding.
But it's in the schools. Thousands of them. I can guarantee you it is officially on the record in more schools than CRT.
Correct. And
I mean, they celebrate that they're teaching the 1619 Project.
100%. Now, explain to people how CRT is connected, like how this is actual critical theory woven into this so-called memory journalism history project.
Right. That's kind of the thing, the difficult thing in fighting back against CRT, because CRT, they're right when they say, well, it's just theory that started at college. Doesn't matter. So they say, no one's teaching it. No one's teaching CRT. No, but they're teaching from CRT. They're taking what they learned by reading the CRT and using it to teach in school. That's why you look at the book. The book is called 1619, blah, 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 and the Progressive Racism Movement.
Right.
I call it progressive racism because, it's kind of gentler racism. It's the feel-good racism that's supposedly premised on good intent to minorities and Black. But it doesn't matter. If you are racially essentializing race, and you are focusing on skin and using it as a determinant to say what we should do, what policies we should put in place, who should get medication, who should get taught certain things, what we should and shouldn't teach, then it's racist, right? So progressive racism is the whole movement. So you can call it what you want. You call it anti-racism, CRT, BLT, what you call it, whatever you want. But the bottom line is it's a bunch of leftists who are saying, I don't like the country and I'm going to use the framework of race because it's so toxic to get people to buy into why we need to make radical changes. And it's just a giant floating Trojan horse that we're using to let in all the trans and all the gender conversation and everything else. And once you open the door, everything is in there. Right? They want to remove any kind of, focus on Judeo-Christian values, anything that's traditional about the country, anything positive about the founders. All that has to go away. They want to center, but they don't want things to be centered on whiteness, whatever that means. And so that means we have to look at everything through a framework and a prism of race in order to get the whiteness out. But that's just racism, right? So what happens? Okay, whites are racist. We all know that. All of you people are racist. But they have created some things, developed some things, advance some things? Do we just ignore that stuff, right?
Right.
So do we teach math only from the things that were founded by people who are not white and just carve out the things that white people did? You do the same thing with science, with English. Do we teach English in a different way? All this stuff makes no sense, but this is what they're actually trying to do.
Right. Do you believe there's such a thing as whiteness? Like, is that even a thing? Or because I mean, what?
Whiteness? I mean, I've seen white people. I don't know about the
Right.
whiteness.
Well, but that's what I'm saying is they claim
Like,
that there's a thing called whiteness that is centered, and we have to decenter it, and there will be no liberation of Black people and brown people and every other people who are not white unless we remove the whiteness. And then paradoxically, you can be Black and be centered in whiteness if you do whiteness stuff or something, whatever that is.
Yeah. No, that's stupid. And it's mostly stupid because they're talking about liberating Blacks, like we need to be liberated.
Well, yeah.
So that alone is defeatist. And
it itself centers white people as the savior of Black people. So in other words, like the Black people are sitting there waiting for white people to do stuff.
Which is never going to happen because you people are racist.
This is Nicole.
I'm waiting for you to come and save my life, but you're racist and you won't do it. But
this is Nicole's whole argument.
Yep.
That's literally her whole argument. We can't possibly do anything good. The country is flawed and terrible from the beginnings, and that Black people have had to do everything themselves to get any freedom at all. But they can't be truly liberated unless white people step back, step off, step out, get rid of gifted programs, etc. I'm like, I'm sorry. I thought that all the liberation you have thus far was because of you, but now white people are the answer to the problem. I'm very confused.
Yep. Well, I mean, obviously, I'm going to think that if the white people are giving me Pulitzer Prizes and all this stuff, and white people are pushing DIE, dye training, and all the corporations, right? When you go to a dye training at I don't know, at 3M or at Chase, that's being pushed by, or at least approved, even if they got a Black HR person. That HR person went to Jamie Dimon, and Jamie was like, I'm okay with it. She said whites are bad. Just not me. I'm waiting for the mass step down of every white CEO in America. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, but why do you think that doesn't happen? So I know the rest of the book deals with that. The rest of the book talks about like BLM and the progressive racism. But what's your estimation of why people who are latching right onto this, even though it makes no sense, it's illogical, it's not backed up in the statistics and facts, so why is everybody falling for it? Is the stain of racism, which has always struck me as another paradox, like we're also racist, but we're so terrified of being called racist that we will literally get down on our knees and shine people's shoes to avoid being called racist?
Yes.
Most racists I know are not that ashamed of it.
True. Both of the things you said make sense, even though they're opposite. Correct. I'm just going to keep saying, yes, that's true. Because it makes no sense. So the answer to all of that is yes. No, I think that it's a combination. Some of them are doing it because they don't know what else to do. It's like, I mean, I don't think I'm racist, but there are racists, and I can't go out and seek them out. And if the Black people say they're dealing with some stuff, I'm not Black. I guess they are. Let's do what we can to help, and ignore the fact they're emotional, so they ignore the fact that that's not actually going to help. Some of them just see dollars like that. They're the mirror image of Kendi. So Kendi's writing stuff so he can get this glorious and fame. They're saying, well, look, I sell a phone. All I want to do is sell phones. But if I tell Black people that I'm on their side and I have my phones automatically pop up images of a BLM logo, more people will buy phones. Okay. I think it's stupid, but I'll do it. Yeah. It's new ways marketing. It's called racist marketing. Racial. I won't say racist. It's racial marketing, right? It's the reason why George Floyd died, and Netflix for 3 months, it's not up there now, but you would turn on your Netflix and it would say the Black Lives Matter collection. Excuse me? Really? Why do I have to? And they don't see that the negatives to it. They're thinking of the positive, but they don't see that some people are going to have pushback and saying, even Black people, like, I'm tired of seeing this everywhere I go. I don't need to see this and hear this. I'm just trying to have a cup of coffee and a biscuit or a scone. What am I, British? I'm just having a cup of coffee and a donut. And I got to say, my bag has got to be in a Black Lives Matter bag. It's got to be a fist on my bag. I mean, Black folks, there's not even a liberal and conservative thing. Black people don't take that seriously. Some of them are like, it's cool that they're doing it, but I don't believe them. Either because they're anti-racist and
Right.
they're like, you're still a racist white person. It's not going to make you, you're not going to become a savior at that point. We're not going to stop calling you racist. But the majority of black people are just like, and they're just doing it because they want to sell more donuts. I don't believe you. Now I'm even mad at you because you patronizing me and I don't believe you. You know, it's a car commercial and it was like, who wants to buy a new car? Who wants to not get shot in the face by police? Blacks are getting shot by police. Buy my car. Excuse me? What? Huh? What? How? What? If you buy our car, it will help you elude the police in the chase so they won't shoot you because you're black. Yeah, these are commercials. That's what we hear in the commercials. That might not be an actual commercial, but that's what I hear when I see the commercial. When they start talking about blackness, and you just want to sell a car. I don't believe you.
Do you think there's such a thing at this point that one might be able to legitimately call black privilege?
Of course there is. What do you mean at this point? There's all like I was on Mark Lamont Hill's show and we were talking about something else, but he got stuck on white privilege because I said I don't really. He said, "Do you think that whites have privilege?" I said, "Yeah, but I don't think every white person has privilege, and I don't think they all have the same privilege." And three, I think that there's other types of privilege. Yes, 100%. If you just took a sound bite, I would sound like an anti-racist. Is that white privilege? Of course it is. If you think it's not white privilege, you're crazy. But there are times when the white privilege don't pay off. Yes, if a white guy has a certain look, will he get treated differently and often better in certain areas? If he looks like a wealthy black white guy and a black guy comes in looking casual at a 5-star restaurant, will they get better treatment? Maybe not every time, but in some cases, yes. But if that same white guy was walking through the hood at 11 o'clock, would he have privilege? Right?
So not really going to work for him.
Right. It's all situated. Women have privilege in certain cases, but when she's being accosted and sexually assaulted, or some guy is hitting on her and catcalling her, she doesn't want it. She doesn't have privilege. But in certain situations, she has pretty people have privilege. Tall people have privilege. Why do you think all the presidents are over 6 feet? Right? That's a privilege. American, being born American, there's 2-parent household privilege. There's income privilege. So you telling me a black kid growing up black, but he's black, right? But both his parents are doctors. He doesn't have a level of privilege. His parents can't call his friends and get him into schools that a poor white can't get him into. Come on. The problem with it is that Oprah says a poor white in a trailer park in Ohio has the same privilege, if not more privilege than she does, and that's foolish. So yeah, that's white privilege, but you just can't end the conversations there. So is there black privilege? Of course. I can say things in certain situations that, we talked about that before. I can say things that you all simply can't say. It's not right. I do it to show the high case how stupid it is, but I can. Right. I can say things you can't say. So
I wonder if we need a new word. Do we need a new word other than privilege?
Right.
That will make it more clear, because
situational privilege. Everybody has situational privilege, and your situational privilege is different from mine. Which one's better? It all depends.
Right. And wouldn't it be great if we replaced that with some gratitude for a change?
We don't have time for that. We got too much racial animus and hatred to have room for gratitude. Sorry. No room at the end for the gratitude, lady.
But that's what I see. I mean, what I see missing from not only obviously her essays and the whole line of thinking, but even from education today and from the wokeness and the race, that today's progressive racism or racial movement is there's no grace and there's no gratitude.
What do you want to be grateful for, though? This crummy racist country? What do you want to be grateful for? I'd rather be somewhere else. I mean, I'm not going there. And yes, I can afford to go there, but I'm not going there. But I'd rather be somewhere else. Where? I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere where blackness is respected.
Okay. Maybe Zimbabwe, unless you're the wrong tribe.
Oh, yeah. Except for that.
Or
maybe, I don't know. But we're still not going to be grateful. What do you want to be grateful for? Yeah. This country founded on DNA of racists? No, thank you. Pooey this country.
Well, what is the way forward, Charles? What do we do? Except keep having these great conversations.
Keep having the conversations. Talk to everybody. I mean, you can act and you can get up and you can donate money to the cause if you don't want to fight, or you can buy 6. I think everybody should buy more than 1 copy of my book. I appreciate you buying a copy, but this is too serious now. We're in dire times. 1 copy is not enough. But I think we should talk. What I do is I encourage people to talk to everybody. Now, you don't talk to them the same way, but everybody, your mom at Thanksgiving dinner, your cousin, talk to the Uber driver, talk to everybody you can. But you have to do it in a sense that that's on the level of the person that you're having a conversation with. So if you're talking to a liberal, you're not just going to lead with Nicole Hannah Jones is a racist. She is, but you probably don't want to lead with that. I don't know. You probably should say, you know what? Did you read 1619 Project? Yeah, I read it. What'd you think about it? I thought it was really good. Yeah, it has some really good parts, but don't you think it's odd that they talked about Reconstruction? They didn't mention Grant. Oh, I didn't notice that. Don't you think it's odd that they didn't say anything positive? Don't you think it could have been a little bit positive, maybe? Oh yeah, I guess they could have been a little bit more positive. But this country, man, so that you base how far you go based on what they say, but you start the conversation with everyone at work, everywhere. You still don't have to be all political because I don't talk about politics at all. So when people mention Trump or Biden, I divert the conversation. I just go, huh, yeah, maybe. But yeah, back to the 8-year-olds, transgender 8-year-olds. Let's go back to that. I just changed the subject. What do you think about Biden? What Biden's doing now? I don't pay attention to Biden. I got a culture to save. I don't have time to worry about politics. That's my response. Never talk about Biden. Never talk about Trump. Don't care.
Well, I think that's really wise because these are cultural problems. They're not political problems. The political issues come out of the culture, not the other way around. And this is the only problem we can fix, in my opinion, on an individual basis.
Yeah.
And what I notice about you that I think is great, and I hope everybody sees this as a role model for not just the method that he's employing, but even the tone, that you're confident without being cocky. It's like you're not going like you're wrong, you're an idiot. You're just saying,
I think it though. But I don't
that's fine. But if that's where you derive the confidence, I don't care. But you have to be unapologetic, people.
Right.
Do not walk into conversations about these things. And if you don't know the facts, or you don't know enough about it, first of all, read his book, then you will. But because it's all sourced, everything in the book, there's footnotes, every possible thing you could ever want is in there. But you go in confident when you have these conversations, and it will go a lot better.
And if you're not confident, what you do? Ask questions. I talk in the book. Oh, you haven't gotten there yet, but I joke about because I show my age, and I talk about what you want to do if you're white and you don't have the facts or you're a little uncomfortable. I need everybody to talk. I need all of you to talk. So if you're uncomfortable, you still talk. What you do is you become Columbo. Remember Columbo?
Ask those questions.
You're the affable, friendly, kind of aloof guy. You're like, excuse me there, Nicole Hannah Jones. I got a quick question. You say that the country's DNA rate. Do you mean everybody? Oh, you do mean all the whites? Oh, I was just trying because it sounded like it, but I wasn't really sure. So what about your name? What about John Brown? John Brown went to Harper's Ferry, stole the weapons. We're going to give them to the slaves. Is it him too? Is it he? Okay. All right. What about Sherman? Sherman, burned his way to the water because he hated all the racists so much. Him too? Okay. So you just ask questions like, really? Oh, okay. So everybody. So does that mean Rachel Maddow? Let's move it to today. All whites are. So it's Rachel Maddow and Stephen Colbert. What about them? The Pulitzer Committee, the people who gave you your prize. Are they? I'm just trying to gauge. I'm just trying to create a gauge. No friction. Just create a gauge. So Pulitzer. Is Pulitzer a white supremacist? The organization, the people who gave you the Pulitzer Prize and who's pushing the 1619 Project in school, are they white supremacists? No. Jake Silverstein, the editor who published your... No. Okay. So you don't think all whites. That's good. We're getting somewhere. Okay. But no, and then they'll come back and then you just ask them questions about what... Because everything they say is going to be illogical. So you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Oh, so not them, but it's these. Okay, so if it's not them and it's just the Trumpers, that's well, I agree with you. It's just Trump, all Trumpers, right? But why do you say everybody there? Why don't you say Trumpers? Why you got to be like all white people? I mean, why you got to do your boy like that? Rachel Maddow had your back. You called her racist. That don't feel right. Did you agree? You could have tweaked it a little bit, right?
Well, and if she were to say anything, if she were to slip up and say, well, Pulitzer just gave me the prize because I'm... Oh, wait.
Mm-hmm. So the racists are supporting the black people. Okay, I'm just confused. I'm just trying to figure it out. One more thing, Ms. Hannah Jones, before you go away. One more thing. So you're saying that the country's endemically racist, yet every year we get more and more, and the system's racist. Let's go back to system racist, right? But everywhere. So I came here from Chicago. I'm in New York, but I came from Chicago, ma'am. Just came from Chicago when I asked you a few questions about Chicago. So system's racist. So in Chicago, not a Democrat, I don't talk politics, forget about that, those people are crazy. But in Chicago, and Illinois specifically, they have a black lieutenant governor and a black mayor and a black police chief and 20 black aldermen, and the CEO of the public school system is black, and the Cook County Board president is black, and have been for a while. They have black congressmen, they have all these black people in power. So are they part of the system, and are they pushing the racism that's in the system, or are they trying to stop the racism? And if they are trying to stop the racism, why have they been failing for decades?
And then
That's
you'd be
what you
blocked.
get.
And then you'd be blocked. Then you're
Oh,
blocked.
because the system is so strong, they can't really do anything. So why are we electing them then? Why don't we elect Rachel Maddow and the whites that are good, because they both care and they're white, so they have to wait a minute. You just centered whiteness. You just said that black elected officials, no matter how many we get, aren't strong enough and don't have enough power to change the system. Basically, I'm assuming because they got the position, because they're black. So really, we need to center whiteness, because whiteness is great and superior to blackness. And if we have the right white in, they can change everything. No, that's not it. So we do need blacks, but we need the right blacks, and the blacks we keep electing. You're admitting, okay, so you're admitting that whiteness is bad, but you're admitting that the blacks we put in the center are bad blacks. So we need to vote every black that's in office out and put new blacks in. No, that's not it either. Okay. Help me out here. And you just ask questions, because then everything they'll say is, well, they just become like, the snake that eats itself.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And to the parents watching whose kids are stuck in this situation, and this is what they're getting in social studies class. This is what now they're getting it in English class, in math class, in science class. It's all, we got a decenter whiteness, we got equity math, we got equity everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've been telling them to get out. I mean, my personal feeling is, especially K-5, get the heck out, because their values are going to be all corrupted and weird, and they're data mining their brains and stuff. But if they've got kids who are being told this is the true history, this is what's true. I mean, I think you've made a great case where I was not, but do you think that they should individually push back within their schools and say, because a lot of parents are intimidated. They're afraid because they've been told, when you push back on CRT or 1619, you're a racist. You don't want to teach the true history.
Right.
But this approach that you've just given us, as great as it is, it's more of a one-on-one conversation that you can have with your neighbors, which is why I've been telling people go door to door, right? But if you can't do that, like, do you think this hurts children? Do you think this hurts? Because I think it hurts children.
It's extremely dangerous. It's probably more dangerous than anything else, because of the percentage of truth that it has in it. If it was like Kendi or some of these other things, they're so, openly racist and silly that nobody would take it serious. But because they have enough little fact in it that's so bad, it shocks you. You're like, oh, this is terrible. But there's no context. But I guess you got to get them out, because if you say something, you're a domestic terrorist now, right? That's what I heard. So, no, I think that you have to do the one-on-one thing. That's the most imperative thing. But that's not the only thing you can do. I mean, you can talk to. I mean, if you when it comes up, like if something happens in school, I mean, you have to question the people that you have to at least let them know that you have an issue with it. Now they're going to ignore you, but you have to at least, let them know you have an issue with it. But you need to reach out to other parents. You'd be surprised how many parents I agree with you, but I thought I was the only one, so I was afraid to say something. So you have to do that as well. But it's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, everybody's not going to be able to take their kid out. Right. And it's like the school choice thing. I used to argue against all the people who are pro-school choice. Not that I'm against it, but one, those schools are also becoming woke, so you're not really going to change that.
Exactly.
And what you do is there's only so many slots. So if 20% of you go to private schools or homeschool, you're still leaving the other 80% to the failing schools. So you still have the majority of the populace being taught this terrible racist ideology. I think that
it's like we have to do both. We do have to do both at the same time.
Right. I think people need to call it out. And the thing we mentioned that I thought of after hearing the parents speak at the conference, I said that as much as I talk about race, this race crazy, we kind of need to lead with the gender thing, because it's the most unifying piece. Black people who are normative, who probably think this stuff is unfair to whites, but they don't care enough to go out and fight, will be completely blown away by the gender stuff that's happening. And it's not a racial thing, so their kid's not exempt. See, technically they might disagree with this racial essentialism, but as a Black parent, they'll be like, my kid's immune to it, because they're not telling my kid, they're not really, because they're telling them that they're oppressed, which is also bad. But they'll be like, at least they're not telling my kid that my kid is, an oppressor and got privilege and all that stuff. So I can roll with that. But then when they find out that they're keeping stuff from them, or they're telling them they can change their gender, or they're telling them that you got boys and they're focused so much on girls while the boys are dropping out and not going to college. They'll be upset about that.
Well,
So,
they also might be upset about what Sloan Rackmuth and I talked about last night with this new social emotional learning thing.
yep.
It is actually already starting that they are frog marching kids out and claiming they're dangerous and
Mm-hmm.
psychologically disturbed and need to be on medication. Whereas before, they would warehouse them in special ed or whatever. Now they're taking this whole, like, let's medicalize it.
Yep.
And that is already disproportionately impacting minority youth in schools. So
Yep.
for all this anti-racism talk, and they start getting busy with the questionnaires, and like, oh, this kid's got, anxiety, depression, and violent tendencies. We got to get them into treatment. And they could be drugging their kids. And one thing I know that Black people are pretty concerned about is government experimenting on them.
Yep. I talk about that too.
Because that's historically accurate too. So,
You're right. So what I think you should do is, like I said, get the book and have little book club meetings and invite me
yeah, it's a
out.
great
With
idea.
Zoom, I can
Book
come and
club.
we can talk about all that and
Mhm.
talk about the school specifically and what we can do and come up with ways that we can approach this stuff in a unified and in a way that won't scare them into thinking you're terrorists, but where they'll take you seriously. So
Right.
I mean, it's a start, and then we can go on from there.
Well, I think I'm going to do that. I think I am going to actually get myself a physical copy and suggest that everybody in my locals community do the same, and host my very first book club based on this book. Because then we can get the people who are in that community to get deep into this, because the book touches on all of it. BLM, 1619, the whole, like all the essays, and then all this other wokeness stuff that's going on, like you said, and we can brainstorm these ideas. Because I think,
keep in mind, it's not political. The other thing,
that's right.
There's other great people doing great work. But if you look at all those, most of the conservatives, they're always going to be something in there about Trump or about Republicans or something that's going to turn off the liberal. But it's not a knock. It depends on who your audience is. And my specific goal was the Black community, which ain't Trumpers, left-leaning people, ain't Trumpers, centrists. So I don't talk about that because this is not a political problem anyway. I'm trying to convince people that this is a cultural problem. Fix the culture. We can argue about taxes later. Right. So this book is.
And that's what I'm talking to parents. My audience are parents and teachers too.
So this book is the right book because I don't talk about any of that, right?
Yeah,
so it's all just like, whatever you think this is a problem, how do we fix it? Solutions-based. And I think that it's the kind of approach that people will be kind of open to.
Fantastic. Well, I cannot thank you enough. This has been a blast. I could obviously, I sit and talk to you all day because you're just like an interesting person and a lot of fun.
Well,
but and what I would like to do, if it's all right, is maybe at some point do like a part 2 to talk about some of the other, but I want to do the BLM piece too, but I got to go back and read that section. I did this one first because it was so obviously like really the education, but you know what? BLM in the classroom is a big deal when it comes to disrupting the family unit and the trans stuff. Right. So we got to talk about that too.
When you read the BLM part, I'm still torn. As I get closer to the publication date, I need to figure out which one I think is better. What I think will be most impactful and shock people the most. I'm big on education, so I say the 1619 piece, but the second third of the book I think will shock people more than anything else. Not the first part. The BLM is a setup they'll kind of know. They'll hear some things they don't know, but the second part, I've been asking people 6 months before the book, just had they ever heard of it? And maybe 2 people have even heard of it. You're going to hear about some stuff you've never even heard of. And people are just like.
And which chapters are you speaking of?
It's the whole center section, probably chapter 5 through 11.
Okay.
I know chapter 12 is the beginning of 1619. So I think it starts at chapter 5.
Okay, so that's why I hadn't gotten that. I'll tell you. I started at the beginning and I started going, I'm going to run out of time.
It's the part on the movement for Black Lives. Have you ever heard of the movement for Black Lives?
Nobody. I just heard of BLM.
Yep. My point exactly. It's going to blow you away.
Okay. Well, so you'll come back and we'll talk about that. Oh, yeah. Okay. So everybody be watching because we'll figure out a date. Because I've just got to, I've got to get that read and you got to let me know what, you got availability, but there will be a part 2 and everybody say thank you to our guest, Charles Love, who has been amazing. Share this out, guys. They have and buy the book. You can follow Charles on Twitter. It's all down in the description box. His Twitter is there. His website is there. You can't see it, but it's underneath the video. And
Okay.
I can
I'm
see.
gonna follow that guy.
Okay, yeah. So you can follow him and keep up with that, and also check out Seeking Excellence in Education, because there's some cool offerings over there if you are interested in actually seeking excellence in education.
Yes.
So thank you, Charles. I hope you have a fantastic afternoon. And when I end this broadcast, I'll still be in the green room if you want to hang out. So all
Well,
right.
thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a great afternoon.